Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into Claritas.
Oh,
They're making some pretty big claims about how they can understand
I
audiences
saw that.
at the household level.
Right.
And everyone else is still stuck analyzing whole neighborhoods.
Right.
So, we've got a ton of material that you sent us on them. We're going to find out what makes them tick.
Yeah, how does their data work? And why does any of this even matter to us, everyday people?
Exactly. What's the impact?
Yeah. I have to say, even for me, the depth they're claiming is really impressive.
It's pretty bold.
Yeah, for marketers.
Huge implications if they can actually pull this off.
For sure.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the first things I noticed looking at all this stuff was this multi-divisive partitioning. MDP.
Oh, yeah, MDP.
It sounds really complex, but it seems like they're using it to predict tons of behavior.
Hundreds, yeah.
Not just buying habits, but all sorts of things.
Media consumption, lifestyle choices, all that.
Yeah, really wide-ranging.
MDP is definitely a step beyond the traditional ways of doing things. Imagine you're trying to predict someone's favorite movie genre, right?
Okay, yeah.
Most systems would just look at a few things oh, how old are they? Where do they live?
Right, super basic.
But with MDP, they're considering thousands of behaviors and hundreds of demographic variables all at the same time.
Wow.
At the household level.
That's a lot to consider.
It is. It's about finding these patterns in a sea of data.
So it's not just about, painting with broad strokes. They're really looking at the fine details within those bigger groups.
Exactly. That's how they get such precise targeting. By understanding the nuances within a demographic group, they can move past just making assumptions and really get to the heart of what drives an individual's behavior.
That's really interesting. So how does it actually work? Can you break down that MDP process a little bit more?
Okay. Imagine a massive decision tree, but instead of simple branches, it's this complex web of interconnected factors. And they're analyzing all of this data to see which demographic factors are the strongest predictors for certain behaviors. It's like a giant puzzle where each piece represents some tiny detail about a household, and they're figuring out how all those pieces fit together.
So that does sound incredibly intricate, but I guess that's what it takes to get to this level of granularity.
Yeah.
How do they then connect those behavioral patterns back to actual people?
That's where their statistical modeling comes in. They develop a model that basically assigns each household to a segment based on all of its characteristics. It's kind of like a probability score. The more a household's traits match a segment's profile, the higher the chance they'll, show the behaviors associated with that group.
So they're not just lumping people into these big categories like, millennials or suburban families. They're really looking at the individual variations within those groups.
Yeah, exactly. And what's really impressive is that they're constantly updating their models. Every year, they add the latest demographic data. They're always testing and tweaking, making sure that their segmentation is accurate.
Staying current.
Reflecting current trends. This is something that really sets them apart, this commitment to accuracy.
Makes sense. In a world where things are always changing.
Right.
But where are they even getting all of this data from? Is it like those big online data brokers?
It's actually more multifaceted than that. A lot of it is self-reported household data.
Oh, interesting.
People are actually providing information about themselves, their lifestyle, their values, their preferences.
So it's not just scraping data from online activity. They're getting these insights directly from people.
Right. And they combine that with other sources like CoreLogic home value data. This helps them get a better view of a household's financial situation.
Makes sense, because that's often a big predictor of their behavior.
It is, absolutely.
So I saw something in here about IPA and net worth scores. Can you tell me about those?
Okay, so this is where it gets even more interesting.
Okay.
Claritas collects self-reported IPA data and net worth information. It's pretty unique.
So they're not just making assumptions about income based on zip codes or job titles.
No.
They're really getting those direct insights into people's financial realities.
Exactly. And that level of detail is gold for marketers. It lets them target high net worth individuals much more precisely.
Makes their marketing dollars go further.
Right. Tailoring their messages to very specific financial profiles and spending habits.
I can see how all of this really comes together to build a detailed picture of each household.
Yeah.
But with this much information, how do they even manage it all?
Well, that brings us to their secret weapon, The Claritas identity graph.
Okay, the identity graph.
Yeah.
That sounds intense.
It is. It's a pretty remarkable technology. So think of
Yeah.
it like a giant database that connects all these different identifiers.
Like what kind of identifiers?
IP addresses, email addresses, physical addresses, even mobile IDs.
So it's connecting all of those digital footprints to real people.
It's more than just tracking, though.
Okay.
They link these identifiers to a ton of information about people, demographics, financial status, media habits, you name it.
Wow.
It's about creating this complete profile of a person within the context of their household.
How much information are we even talking about here? Like, how big is this identity graph?
It covers every single U.S. household.
Seriously.
Over 1.2 billion devices, all linked to this huge amount of data. It's pretty mind-boggling, the scale.
That's massive. But with that much data, I mean, how can they possibly be sure that it's accurate? It seems like there's so much room for error.
Yeah, you're right. Accuracy is critical when you're dealing with this volume of data. And Claritas has put a lot of resources into ensuring that their identity graph is high quality and reliable.
So how do they validate all of that information?
Yeah. Well, they have a multi-pronged approach. One of the key things is this bi-directional validation process for assigning IP addresses to zip codes.
Okay, I'm not sure I follow.
Imagine you're checking your address twice.
Okay.
Once from your house to the street, and then from the street back to your house.
Oh, interesting.
That's essentially what they're doing, but with IP addresses and zip codes to ensure that it's accurate.
That's a smart way to double check.
Yeah, it is. But of course, that takes some sophisticated technology to do that on such a large scale.
I bet.
And they don't stop there. They also use what they call a truth set.
A truth set. What is that?
It's a huge collection of validated data that they get from online surveys. They cross-reference this data with their IP to zip code assignments to make sure that the digital world is matching up with real-world locations.
So they're grounding their digital data in real-world verification.
Exactly. And they've spent millions of dollars developing these validation methodologies.
Wow.
Especially for linking online and offline identities across devices. It's a big investment.
So they're clearly committed to getting this right. But what are the benefits for marketers? How can they actually use the identity graph?
Well, the identity graph lets marketers go way beyond just basic demographic targeting. They can target individuals based on a much deeper understanding of their lifestyles, interests, and behavior.
So we're talking about truly personalized marketing messages.
Exactly. Moving from that old mass marketing approach to something much more personalized.
And it's not just advertising.
No.
This level of detail could change how marketers measure the success of their campaigns.
Absolutely.
Figure out what's working, what's not.
Optimize their strategies.
Yeah, making sure their money is well spent.
And because the identity graph can link online and offline activity, marketers can get a much clearer picture of the customer journey.
So they can see how those different channels are working together.
Exactly. Like, how does a direct mail piece influence someone's online behavior? Or vice versa. It provides a much more holistic understanding of the customer experience.
That's really interesting. But with all this data and tracking, how do they handle privacy concerns?
Well, to their credit, Claritas seems to be very aware of those concerns.
Okay, good.
They've emphasized that they have a privacy-compliant approach, and they're working to reduce their reliance on cookies and device data,
Which is a good thing.
especially with all the new privacy regulations popping up.
Exactly. It seems like they're trying to find that balance between data-driven marketing and actually respecting individual privacy.
Yeah, trying to find that sweet spot.
But it's still kind of unsettling to think about all this data collection. What kind of assurances do we have that they're actually using it responsibly?
It comes down to trust and transparency.
Right.
Consumers need to feel confident that their data is being treated ethically. And Claritas or any company like them, they have to be open about what they're doing and show that they're committed to data privacy.
Okay, so we've talked about their methodology, the data sources,
Yeah.
the identity graph. But how do we know this even works? Do they have any proof that it actually gets results?
Oh yeah, they're very transparent about their results.
Okay.
They've really tried to show how effective their approach is.
What kind of evidence do they have?
Well, for one thing, they've massively increased the size and accuracy of their identity graph.
So more data, more accuracy.
Right. They've doubled the number of residential IP addresses, hashed emails, mobile devices, cookies, all linked to households at the zip code level. So they're capturing more data points,
Okay, wider net.
leading to more precise targeting and attribution.
So it's not just a static database. It's constantly evolving and getting smarter.
Right. And they've developed a new model that uses AI to continually improve the accuracy of their consumer identifier assignments.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, they're not just relying on assumptions, they're measuring and verifying their results.
It sounds like they're really holding themselves accountable. But what about this confidence scoring methodology I saw?
Oh, yeah. That's another layer of sophistication. It lets marketers choose between prioritizing accuracy or reach, depending on their campaign goals.
So they can be more strategic.
Exactly. If a campaign needs to be super accurate, they focus on the highest confidence matches. But if they want to reach a broader audience, they can adjust the parameters.
That makes sense. But how does all of this translate into tangible results for businesses? Are there real-world examples of how this approach has led to better outcomes?
Oh, absolutely. Their enhanced identity graph has allowed them to create these highly targeted and scalable audiences.
Okay.
And they can integrate those audiences with over 150 different marketing platforms and partners.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah. It means marketers can quickly and easily execute campaigns across all sorts of channels.
Like what kind of channels?
Email, social media, display advertising, direct mail, connected TV, even podcasts.
So they're not just providing the data, they're making it really easy to use that data.
Exactly.
Can you give me some specific examples of how this has played out in the real world?
One of the biggest benefits has been their ability to identify and target anonymous website traffic.
So even if someone hasn't given their information,
Right. By connecting online behavior to their offline data, they can understand the demographics, interests, and buying habits of people who visit a website, even if they haven't filled out a form or anything.
that's incredible.
It is. It lets marketers personalize the website experience, even for those anonymous visitors.
Really, so they can tailor the content and offers based on those predicted demographics.
Exactly. And this kind of personalization can make a big difference in engagement and conversion rates.
So it's like taking the power of personalized email marketing and applying it to the entire website.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. And it's not just about personalization.
What else?
It's also really valuable for building more sophisticated retargeting campaigns.
So instead of just retargeting everyone.
Right. Marketers can now focus on very specific segments of anonymous visitors who are the most likely to convert.
And that's based on their predicted characteristics.
Right. So it's about making sure the ad spending is more efficient and they're getting a better return on their investment.
It's all about getting the right message to the right people at the right time.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And the really cool thing is that they can connect online behavior to offline actions as well.
Wait, really? They can link those two worlds?
Oh, yeah. By linking those online identifiers to their offline data, they can measure the effectiveness of offline channels.
So like direct mail or TV ads.
Right, even podcasts. They can see how those offline channels are influencing online behavior.
So they can see the bigger picture.
Exactly. It shows the real impact of those multi-channel campaigns.
But how do they know they're getting it right? I mean, is there a risk of misattributing online actions to the wrong offline exposure?
There's always a risk of some misattribution in any marketing measurement system, but Claritas has a sophisticated methodology.
Okay.
They leverage their identity graph to match and verify digital activity and those consumer identifiers.
Like email addresses and in-app activity.
Exactly. And they've specifically reduced their reliance on cookies and device data to minimize that risk.
So they're trying to walk that line between data-driven marketing and privacy.
Yeah, they're using a combination of online and offline data to create a more comprehensive view of the customer journey.
While being more privacy conscious.
Right. And that's especially important now with all the new privacy regulations.
Absolutely. I also saw something about UID 2.0. Can you tell me what that is?
Sure. UID 2.0, or Universal ID, it's an industry standard identifier.
Okay.
It lets consumer data be shared for marketing purposes while still complying with privacy regulations.
So it's kind of like a common language that different platforms can use.
Exactly. And Claritas has integrated UID 2.0 into their system.
So they're on board with that.
Yeah, it makes it easier for marketers to share data securely and efficiently while following all those privacy rules.
So how does all of this technology impact the average person? Is it just another way for companies to bombard us with ads, or could it actually make our lives better?
That's the big question, isn't it? Like any technology, it has the potential for both good and bad.
A double-edged sword.
Right. It really depends on the intentions and the ethics of the companies using it.
So we need to be careful.
We do. We need to be informed, ask critical questions, and hold companies accountable.
We can't just blindly accept any new technology.
Mm.
We have to think about how data is being used and make sure it's responsible.
Absolutely. We all have a responsibility.
It seems like Claritas is at least trying to do the right thing. They're
Mhm.
focusing on privacy and trying to reduce their reliance on cookies and device data.
Yeah, they seem to be heading in the right direction.
It'll be interesting to see if they can actually live up to those promises. But this has been a fascinating look into their approach.
It has. We've just scratched the surface of what's possible with this kind of data. And the future of marketing is definitely going to be shaped by how we choose to collect, use, and protect that data.
It makes you think about all the choices we make every day and how they're contributing to this data-driven world.
Right.
But before we wrap up this part of the deep dive, what stands out to you as the most significant thing about Claritas?
For me, it's their commitment to accuracy and validation.
Interesting.
In a world where data is often just treated like a commodity, they're really focused on the integrity of their information. That's so important for building trust.
I completely agree. Accuracy is the foundation for trust. And if we don't have that, then this whole data-driven world falls apart.
Exactly.
So kudos to them for recognizing that. But that doesn't mean we should just blindly trust them either.
Of course not.
We as consumers need to be informed, ask questions, and hold companies accountable
We do.
for how they're using our data.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now let's look at some of the potential downsides to their approach and talk about what safeguards are needed to prevent misuse of this technology.
It's interesting how Claritas is walking this line between using all this granular data and protecting consumer privacy.
Yeah.
Like they're saying they can help marketers reach the right people without relying on those pesky cookies.
Right, which everybody hates.
Exactly.
But how do they actually do that? I mean, cookies have been around forever.
Right.
What are they using instead?
It all comes back to that identity graph. Because they already have this deep understanding of each household, they don't need to rely as much on those individual tracking methods.
Interesting.
They can use their offline data, financial insights, those demographic profiles all combined to identify and target specific audiences.
With a high degree of accuracy.
Exactly. It's like they're saying, we already know so much about you that we don't need to track your every move online.
I see, so they're kind of flipping the script.
Right. And that message is really powerful at a time when people are, getting more and more concerned about their privacy.
Okay.
It lets marketers reach the people they want without using those creepy tracking methods.
Okay, I get the logic,
Yep.
but I'm still a little skeptical.
Yeah.
Can they really be as precise without cookies? I mean, cookies give you that real-time tracking and personalization.
Right.
How do they replicate that with data that's not constantly updating?
That's where their fancy modeling and AI come in. Remember all that stuff we talked about, the multi-identifier model, the confidence scoring system?
Yeah.
Those tools allow them to predict behavior and pinpoint their audience with a good degree of accuracy, even without real-time tracking data.
So they're basically anticipating what we need and want.
Exactly. They're constantly refining those models, incorporating new data.
Because it's dynamic, even if it's not real-time in the traditional sense.
Right. It's adapting all the time.
That's pretty amazing. It's almost like they're taking these limitations from privacy regulations and turning them into, like, a reason to innovate.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's something we're going to see more of as privacy concerns keep growing.
For sure.
Companies are going to have to get creative to provide those personalized experiences without being too intrusive.
And it seems like Claritas is kind of leading the charge.
I think so.
I'm starting to see the bigger picture now. It's not just about data, it's about trust.
Absolutely.
Consumers are way more likely to share their data if they think a company is using it responsibly.
Right. And Claritas is really emphasizing privacy.
Trying to build that trust.
Exactly. Trust is everything in this data-driven world.
Makes you wonder how this tech is going to impact our everyday lives as consumers.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah, it's still early, but like any technology, it could be used for good or for bad.
It all depends on the companies using it, their intentions,
It's a double-edged sword.
Right. It could create these really cool personalized experiences, but it could also be used to manipulate us.
Totally.
We have to be careful.
You can't just be passive.
No, we have to be informed, ask questions, hold companies accountable.
We all have a role to play in shaping how data is used.
We do. We have to make sure it's used responsibly.
It seems like Claritas is at least making an effort in the right direction.
Yeah, they are.
We'll see how it all plays out. This has been a fascinating deep dive so far.
It really has. And we've just scratched the surface, The future of marketing is going to be really interesting as all of this develops.
Makes you think.
It does.
Okay, so now I think it's time to shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
Let's think about some of the potential downsides of Claritas's approach?
Yeah, good idea.
And what needs to be done to prevent this technology from being misused?
It's important to consider those risks, even if a company has good intentions.
Right. Because things can go wrong.
Definitely. Let's dive into those risks and see how we can prevent them.
One of the first things I think about is just the sheer amount of data they have.
Yeah.
It's a lot of personal information. What's to stop hackers from getting access to it?
That's a huge concern for any company that's handling sensitive data.
Totally.
We need to know what their cybersecurity measures are. Like, do they have strong encryption? Do they have procedures for dealing with breaches?
That's really important.
It is.
And it's not just about outside threats either.
Right.
What about their own employees? Could somebody on the inside misuse the data?
That's a big ethical question.
Could it be sold to third parties without people knowing?
Yeah, it's a serious concern.
Do they have strict rules about who can access what?
Right. Strong internal controls, auditing processes, what's their policy on data sharing and how long they keep data, all of that should be transparent.
Transparency is key.
Absolutely. People have a right to know what's happening with their data.
Who has it, how long it's kept.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's say their security and ethics are top-notch.
Okay.
There's still the issue of, like, unintended consequences.
Right.
What if their algorithms are biased? Could that make inequality worse?
That's a really important point. We've seen how algorithmic bias can creep into all sorts of things.
It's everywhere.
Yeah, from hiring to loans. If Claritas models are trained on data, that's already biased.
It could just amplify those biases.
Exactly, and have real consequences in the real world.
It's not just about having accurate data. It has to be representative and fair.
Absolutely. They need to address those potential biases.
Make sure their algorithms are equitable.
For sure.
So even if we set aside security, transparency, and bias, there's still the question of, like, what does this do to individual choice?
Interesting.
Does all this profiling limit our freedom?
That's a big one, yeah. It's a really complex question.
If everything we do is already predicted, are we less free?
Yeah. Does it make us less likely to try new things to break out of those patterns?
Like those sci-fi stories where everything's
Yeah.
predetermined.
Exactly.
If an algorithm says you're going to be a stay-at-home parent, does that make you less likely to start a business?
It's not just about limiting choices, but also about how those predictions shape how we see ourselves.
Right. Like those labels we get put into.
If marketers are tailoring their messages based on those predictions,
Yeah.
it could just reinforce those boxes.
Interesting. But what if it actually opens up new possibilities?
Oh, yeah, there's that side of it too.
Maybe we discover things we never would have otherwise.
Right, new ideas, products, experiences.
Connect with people who are similar to us.
Exactly. It's like having a recommendation engine for life.
But even then, there's that question of trust. Are these recommendations actually good for us? Or are they just trying to get us to spend money?
That's the thing. Right.
We have to be smart. Think critically.
We can't just take it all at face value.
Right, we have to participate in how this technology is used.
Absolutely.
It seems like Claritas is a window into a future where data is really powerful, but also potentially dangerous.
It's a future that needs our attention, you know? We have to think carefully about it.
We can't just sit back and let it happen.
No, we have to shape it, make sure it benefits humanity.
Like that.
It's a responsibility we all share.
Well, we've reached the point in our deep dive where we're going to switch gears.
Okay.
We're going to hear from Claritas directly.
This is great. We can
Yeah.
get their perspective on all of this.
Exactly. Let's see what they have to say. We've been really digging into Claritas' approach to data and how it could, like, totally change how marketers connect with people.
Yeah, it's a whole new world.
And, of course, we talked about some of those potential downsides.
Ethical stuff.
Right, exactly.
Making sure it's used responsibly.
But now we actually get to hear from Claritas themselves. They're here to give us their take on everything we've been talking about.
Should be interesting.
Yeah, welcome to the deep dive.
Thanks for having us. We're excited to be here.
It's great to have you. So we've been, deep in the weeds with all of your company's data and demographic stuff.
Lots of questions.
We do. Let's start with security.
Okay.
You're dealing with so much sensitive information. What are you doing to keep that data safe?
Data security is our absolute top priority. We use a bunch of measures to protect our data, like encryption, multi-factor authentication, and regular security audits.
Okay, so you've got those layers of protection.
We do, and we have a whole team of security experts who are constantly watching for any threats.
That's good to hear.
It's not just about outside threats, though, right? What about your own employees?
Right, that's important too.
What's stopping them from misusing the data?
We take internal security just as seriously. We have strict rules about who can access what and how data can be used.
Right.
Everyone goes through background checks.
Okay.
And we do training on data security and privacy best practices all the time.
Transparency is another big one for consumers.
Definitely.
How are you being transparent about what data you collect and how you use it?
We want to be really open about all of that. Our privacy policy is super clear, and it's easy to find on our website. We explain exactly what data we collect, how we use it, and who we share it with.
So people can make informed choices.
Exactly. And they can opt out of certain things if they want to.
You mentioned data sharing. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. We only share data with partners who meet our strict privacy standards.
Okay.
And we never sell personal information without explicit consent.
That's good to know.
We've talked a lot about algorithmic bias as well.
Right, and that's a valid concern.
How are you ensuring that your models aren't perpetuating inequality?
We're working on that in a few ways. We're using diverse data sets to train our models. And we're testing them regularly for bias. We're also working with experts from outside the company.
To get a fresh perspective.
Exactly, to make sure our models are fair and equitable.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we also talked about the potential impact of this technology on, like, individual freedom.
Yeah, the idea that we might be limiting people's choices by predicting their behavior,
Right.
that's something we think about a lot. But we believe that by giving people more relevant information, we're actually expanding their choices, not limiting them.
Interesting.
How so?
Well, we can help them discover things they might not have found on their own.
Like a personalized guide.
Exactly. We can connect them with communities they didn't know about.
Okay.
Help them make more informed decisions about their lives.
So you see it as empowering.
We do, yeah.
So what about the future? Where do you see data-driven marketing going in the next few years?
I think we're going to see it get even more personalized and relevant.
Which is kind of scary, but also exciting.
It is both, for sure. But we also need to make sure it's done responsibly.
Definitely.
Companies need to be transparent about their data practices.
And prioritize security.
Yes. And use data to empower people, not take advantage of them.
I think that's a great point to end on.
It is. Thanks for joining us and sharing your perspective.
It was our pleasure. Thanks for having us.
So listeners, that wraps up our deep dive into Claritas.
We've covered a lot.
Their technology, the potential benefits, the ethical challenges.
It's a complex issue.
It is. And the conversation about data privacy and the future of marketing is far from over.
Keep learning, keep asking questions, and make sure your voice is heard.
Exactly. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive, and we'll see you next time.